Hi, we're going to look at diphthongs. What a word to look at. Diphthong is two letters that are put together, but they have one sound. For example, an alpha and an iota, when we put them together, it has the sound I, like an aisle. In fact, we'd have diphthongs in English too. Aisle would be an example of that, the AI. An alpha upsilon, when we put that together, it's going to have the sound of owl, like house. Much like, alpha upsilon. Here's another diphthong, the epsilon and the upsilon, and that's the U sound, like in fuse. You notice I get both sounds, but they're squished together, U. I can have either the U or the, notice the eta upsilon. Again, it has that same sound as in fuse, the U sound. The omicron and the iota, they can be joined together as in oil. Notice the English word oil is that's a diphthong, that oi. I have the epsilon upsilon or the omega upsilon, and that's going to have a oo sound, like in you or in soup, the oo sound. And finally, I have the upsilon and iota, and that's going to have a E sound, as in, like in we, the E sound. Now let's take some of those and put them into practice. Here's a diphthong in the first part of this word, and we're going to pronounce it euangelion. Notice the U, that's our diphthong, just the first two letters. Euangelion, and that's the word for gospel. Here's another one, probably a familiar one to us if you sound it out. It's Jerusalema, and notice the rough breathing mark, I forgot to put that on, Jerusalema. So I have an iota and an epsilon to start off with. Here is phino. Notice it's got a the phi and then the aleph and iota. That's my diphthong. Phino means I shine, or I guess if you're appearing, you could be said to shine. So I appear. Hutas. Hutas. My first two letters form my diphthong. That oo sound. Hutas. This. Akenas. If hutas is this is that. So akenas. That. Notice the second two vowels, the epsilon and the iota, that forms my diphthong. So akenas. A sound. Exousion. Exousion is authority. I guess you could translate it power, but there's a different word for power, so we're going to go with authority, exousion. And that oo sound with the omega, and the upsilon and the upsilon. Ice, ice. Notice the epsilon and the iota form a diphthong, ice. It means into. And oikos. The first two letters form my diphthong, the oi sound, oikos, with the omicron and the iota. Oikos. It has a smooth breathing mark, by the way. Oh, something I didn't mention about the breathing mark. Notice the breathing mark isn't over the first letter, it's over the second letter, and that's because in a diphthong, the breathing mark will be pushed back to the second letter, but it governs the whole thing. So this is a smooth breathing mark. I've got the accent too, but we haven't talked about accents yet. And oikos, then, if that had been a rough breathing mark, I guess I would have put it in the same place, but I could have gone hoikos, but that wouldn't be a word. Oikos is my word, and it's the word for house. Pneuma. Now notice in this case I did not pronounce the pi or p. Maybe I should have. I'm just in the habit of being maybe a little lazy. So if you want to go pneuma, you go right ahead. But I'm just going to keep on saying pneuma. But what we're looking at is the diphthong, the epsilon upsilon, the eu sound, eu. So pneuma. And here we have autois. I actually have two diphthongs here, two for the price of one. The alpha and the upsilon, first of all, with the smooth breathing mark, autus. And then the tois, the oi, that's my second diphthong, so I get two for the price of one. Next I have autu, he, autu, and that's two breathing marks as well. So au, that's my first diphthong. Did I say two breathing marks? I meant two diphthongs. Au, and then the omicron and the upsilon, that forms my second diphthong. And finally, our familiar theos. I'm not sure if that's it. Let's say eos. That's not really a diphthong. I'm sorry. I'm gonna take that out of here. Pistuo. Pistuo means I believe. The u with the epsilon, upsilon, the second to the last two letters. And what reminds me is that it's a diphthong is that accent mark. Notice the accent is always put over the second letter in the diphthong if it's a diphthong. It would never go over the first letter. Oida. You see that? You see that? Oida. You see it and you know it. Oida. That's a diphthong. And akanos. The epsilon and the iota. All right, let's talk a bit about accents. We have three basic types of accent. Notice they are called the acute, the grave, and the circumflex, and they're shaped differently. The acute is slanted over toward the right. The grave is slanted over to the left, and the circumflex is sort of a half moon. I guess I'm not sure how else you could describe that. And a very, very rare one, you don't see this very often, but the diaresis. But we won't really talk about that right now. That's very rare. Usually the acute, the grave, and the circumflex. And these serve as accent marks as opposed to the diaresis, which separates the diphthong. So, for example, notice logos. That's my first word with the acute. And then the second word, kai, is just a word for and I have the grave, and finally the circumflex. Remember, if it's a diphthong, it's over the second letter in the diphthong. So tu. Tu is another word for thee. It's just used in a different part of the sentence, but we'll get to that in the future. All right, accents were originally tonal in nature, but we lost that, and we don't have any recordings, so we can't really reproduce that. Accents in verbs like to go as far forward as they are able, but they're not able to go very far. Here's the rule. Accents can't go more than 3 syllables forward. That's as far as they are allowed to go. They're always restricted to the last 3 syllables of a word. So, for example, if my accent is on the very last syllable, we call it the ultima. Now, it can be any one of those 3, but it's the ultima. It's the penult if it's almost the last, second to the last. And if it's as far forward as it can be, it's only 3 syllables forward as it can be, before the almost last, that would be the antepenult. Actually, that's what antepenult means. It means almost before the almost last. It's sort of a funny little word. Now, accents in nouns like to stay where they are. They don't like to move around. But accents in verbs, remember, verbs are our action words, and the accents like to get in on the action as well. It's an easy way to remember that. So notice the acute is any of the last 3 syllables. The grave can be only on the last syllable. So that kai, notice kai, there's only 1 syllable, so that didn't really help. With the acute logos, there's only 2 syllables, but it could have been in any 3. And the circumflex is on the last 2 syllables and over a long vowel. Now, we haven't talked about short and long vowels yet. Like that oo sound would be a long vowel. Ah would be short. But we'll talk about that later on, or maybe somewhere else. And then we already noticed that the diaresis that separates the diphthong. An acute on the ultima turns into a grave if followed by another word with no intervening mark of punctuation. Man, what a rule. Tell you what, that's the rule, but we're just going to be practicing reading it, so we'll come back to that maybe sometime in the future. Now, punctuation marks. A period and a comma are just like in English. So when it comes to a period or comma, you don't have to learn anything new if you can read English. It's just like the English. But we have several other punctuation marks. We have what looks like a semicolon. That's actually a question mark. That's going to serve as a question mark. And then we have what's called, I guess it looks like an elevated dot. That's going to serve as a semicolon. When we see, notice that it's not a period. Periods would be lower. It's a little higher than a period. But that serves as a semicolon.